Hello everyone, welcome to Disruptive Tech Innovation, Episode 5. My name is Adam O'Dwyer and today is February 9th, 2020. So I'm going to try to continue to do as I did last weekend, where I'm going to try to break things up again. I still ended up being well over my 8 to 10 minutes that I'm still shooting for, so I'm going to continue to try my best and get there eventually. So let's get started. Again, this is the website. We'll get straight to some of the discussion. So starting with the Tesla side of the house, here was a nice Yahoo Finance interview with Kathy Wood over at ARK-Invest. We all are well aware of her. We've talked about her enough just about every single time we talk. And, you know, the key thing to a lot of this is she does a lot of what this channel is about along the lines of disruptive innovation, disruptive technologies, transformation, and so forth. So obviously follow her and her team quite religiously, as does quite a bit of the YouTube folks that we follow as well, especially on the Tesla side anyway, and some on the AI as well. So in this interview, they talked about a number of different things. She highlighted the battery technology. We're all very familiar. Tesla's well ahead of all their competitors, at least 3 years ahead. They will have their battery day in April. It was supposed to be this first quarter of the year, but they pushed it out. They mentioned on the quarterly or the earnings call last week that they were moving it to April. So, and obviously there'll be a lot about Maxwell Technologies and a lot of the other advancements they're making. She also talked about AI and the self-driving, autonomous driving, and that whole story we're all familiar with, where Tesla has made their own chips. They talked about that on Autonomy Day last year. And she compared that sort of to Apple building their own chips, as opposed to Intel and NVIDIA or some of the others out there, AMD. And so, again, that's adding to the story of how they're still well ahead. And then I kept it on this little screen here, capture. Again, they talked about quite a bit throughout. But a lot of the talk has been 1,500 on a bear case, or the low end, and she articulates that. The 7,000, which everyone's well aware, it used to be 4, 5, 6, now 7,000. Her bull case is 15,000, or their bull case. And there's even talk of 22,000 now. I think Gally and some of the others that we follow, Rob, I think some of them have talked about all of that in detail, that analysis. So as we get to some of those channels, I highly recommend you get to those to get some of those details. But great summaries there. And then she gets into a little bit about solar. They ask about, what about the solar piece? And she mentions solar's not really in her numbers, but it's still an amazing opportunity. And she talked about how Tesla's partnering with some of the installers, working with some of the financing, and she thinks it's a great strategy. So good story here. Usually I start off, or lately I've been starting off with the Tesla stock numbers. As you can see, we had a pretty interesting year. That might be an advertisement right there there you go. There's a little more of that same discussion we just talked about. It was pretty amazing. The whole chart, as we're well familiar, it's parabolic over the last few months, as they say in the cryptocurrency analyses anyway. And as you can see, pretty much Tuesday, right around late in the day, literally about 10 minutes, this says 15 minutes or so, but 45 minutes or so, but it seemed like about the last, 10, 15 minutes before the end of the day, the stock just, tanked about 90 points by the end of the day. I think there's a lot of things behind that. Some of it might be a little bit of the coronavirus, perhaps. I think also there's the run up. I think there a lot of that in those last 2 days just skyrocketing. I think was S&P possibility for this year, so futures there. There were some bunch of EV commercials for the Super Bowl. That was huge. Excuse me. And I think definitely these ARK numbers that have recently been increasing. Excuse me. And I think even also, and Gally and Rob and some of the other guys, Jeremy, a lot of them, I've talked about some of this as well. And so everybody's been kind of doing an analysis. We'll show that in a minute. It's really also some of the public just catching up with the whole FOMO, where fear of missing out, and maybe that's some, and some are even comparing to the Bitcoin of November 2011. 17, I'm sorry. And then there's also talk a little bit about some of the short squeeze. I thought at first maybe not, but then as I watched some of the other guys' videos this week, perhaps there might be a little bit more there. And I think even one of these pages, I think I'll show, one of these, CNBC or one of these over here, I'll show you some numbers later. Definitely some of the Panasonic, I guess they've had some positive earnings this quarter, so that's amazing. And someone said it's simply just, with the people wanting to get in that whole FOMO piece. Ron Barron also was on CNBC, I think, this week, and also talked about it. And we'll show you that. And since then, it's pretty much been up and down, as you can clearly see that once some of the dip happened, and some of these charts we'll talk about in a second, pretty amazing. And I think also that the analysts are finally catching up, and I've talked about that, where I've complained, and I think we'll talk in a minute here about some of the short squeezes or the short sellers out there. With some of the things that they've done, they're trying to catch up, of course, but just the analysts or the reporters finally catching up, and the analysts continually upping their numbers has been, just pretty chaotic, I think. They've been all over the place. So let's get into a little bit. Also, we talked last week where I had a thought around the market cap catching up to, at some point, Toyota, which is just over 200 billion. And I think when the numbers hit up around 969, I think the market cap was somewhere in the 170 billion or something crazy. So they weren't too far away at all. That was pretty amazing. And obviously it's dropped down a little bit since. So let's see. And also, this also talks a little bit, I'll show some slides, some information. Last week, and a couple weeks ago, I also mentioned how Jack Rickard over at, I think, EVTV, he's been doing some things with, he sold a bunch of his stock that he was long on, started getting more into the options, the calls and puts. And there's another tab here we'll show where he's just killing it. He's just, the guy's amazing. So, all right, so let's get into a little bit of those charts real quick. So Alessio has done some amazing analysis. It's very similar to Donovan at DIY, and we've talked about him. We'll mention him toward the end here very quickly when we get into the episode 5B. So this is, again, Tesla, artificial intelligence, and then we'll talk about the blockchain. But so he does some really good analysis. Some of his numbers were, again, a lot of things I do on this. When we talked here about CNBC, I'm not too worried about sort of summarizing a little more detail about what they do. And some others I will. But others, I want to try to just give a very high-level summary and encourage you to go to their page and watch their video and get those details. I don't want to take so much away from them and give all the information. I want to share and help them with their channels, although he's doing pretty well so far. But he gives some really good information, and watch this and his analysis on where that's going and some of his thoughts. So it's pretty interesting. Meanwhile, I found this very, very interesting. This wasn't specific to Tesla, but it was just the stock market as a whole, the economy in general. Now, a lot of times there's a lot of stuff out there with a lot of doomsdayers out there. I've mentioned that in the past. Whatever that might be, whatever their reasons, maybe people are long or short or political or whatever their situation is. There's just so much out there right now. It's amazing. And in fact, I kind of almost thought this is my first time seeing this channel here. So I wasn't quite sure at the beginning when he starts getting into some of these reasons. He's literally listing some right there. And that's where I thought it was, another doomsdayer. but instead he does just amazing. You can see all these different charts. He gets into everything possible about macro and microeconomics, stocks in general, the type of charts and graphs, and you have to watch this. Look at even the title, the most important stock market and investing video you will ever watch. I think this is a pretty amazing title. It's pretty accurate, so you have to watch this. It's very interesting. Again, I won't give the end results, but literally all the stuff he talks about at the end, he summarizes, of course, and it's you just have to watch it. Really, really very interesting. Okay, so let's get into our usual, where again I kind of get into a little bit about some of the key areas I follow quite a bit. Rob here with Tesla Daily Podcast. Again, he's just always amazing with very in-depth analysis of what's happening every single day. He must spend 23 hours a day doing this research and putting this together and then recording. I don't know how he sleeps, but anyway, very good information here. In particular, so he did start, he has his few videos here. Did get into some of the short squeeze that I was talking about earlier. Did get into about, obviously the stock, the price as well. On this one here, get into what we talked earlier with Ron Barron's, I think on CNBC, the forecasting that he has for 1 trillion and so forth. We've heard several others. I think Kathy's talked about it, and definitely some others. I think, if I recall, Gally and Jeremy as well. So anyway, a good number of them are talking about it. He also talked about how the Saudi had their fund in there, and there was a potential takeover quite a while ago, but they end up selling some. Again, I'm just kind of giving high level. Watch the video to get all the details here. Talked about Citron Research. They're up and down, left and right, shorting and not shorting and so forth. They talked about even Musk would short, and one of the other guys talked about as well in their video. Talked about Ford and their earnings. More about the short sellers and the Tesla injury estimates, which I think this little quick this one here will show that a little more detail, but as is his video too. A lot of the guys are talking about the Texas Gigafactory, where Elon tweeted this, which he had already done some analysis. I can't recall if it was Rob or one of the other guys. I think it was probably Rob, where he got into some details on the history of that, where they looked at that the last go around, where they went for Gigafactory 2, I think it was. So very interesting there. This was a good podcast on the brand itself. So this guy here that he interviewed, they had a podcast together as a brand expert. I can't recall his name. And then just today he did a good 2020 outlook and some in-depth on the options. I have not had a chance yet to look at that, but some good information there. All right, so let's get into Gally with some of his analysis as well. He's done some great stuff, as he always does. So highly recommend. He had some live chat, live discussion. It was really good, talking about the stock itself, but also he's talked quite a bit about Texas, the numbers, and also some of his other prior analysis that he's done. So as always, he's just outstanding. So Jeremy with his 2 channels, with Financial Education and Financial Education 2, he's done his few videos here for the week. So where if we go to Financial Education, he's done he's always doing some general about his portfolio overall, where he's going, how he's doing with that, of course, Uber. But on one hand, he did do a nice relaxing kind of, sipping some martinis by the pool, even though he really wasn't. But it was, when the run up, it was pretty interesting. He was, pretty much trying to tell everybody, hey, everybody, play it cool. These things happen, these run ups. You can't get too excited, because just as fast as it can go up, it can go down. Obviously, a day or two later, it went down. So that was pretty interesting analysis there. And then, as it turns out, he was able to end up talking about selling some of his Tesla shares, and then he ended up buying some back because of the dip. So I don't know how he figured this out, other than he keeps talking about his 10, 12, 13, 14 years of experience in the market. So clearly he saw what was happening, and that was pretty fascinating. So as always, more great videos with regard to a lot of the details, on a little bit of update analysis on the earnings. Obviously get into some of the stocks, and a great story on the Tesla truck coming up. Here, as I just mentioned, as I've mentioned a number of times, these short sellers, so Chanos, Spiegel, Einhorn, and Johnson. Here's a little bit about Johnson, but they get into every one of these guys with Chanos, Spiegel, Einhorn here, and of course Johnson. And so I captured this piece here because several times where, he's just trying to bully Galley, and Galley's just, he's laughing about it, and as you can tell, he's trying to get him a little more frustrated. But Galley, you just killed it again. I think I mentioned this last time or recently or whatever, but very proud of you. You've done outstanding. But he tries to, just as I mentioned last week, where there was, with Tony Seba and his analysis on why a lot of analysts and reporters and so forth just don't get it, is they're all about this historical data. And he even mentions it several times that, I look at the facts versus Galley, your aspirational thing. And that's, again, gets him laughing. Where, again, it's all about these analysts who have it clueless, are all about historical facts and what this did or that did, as opposed to what the futures are and doing their real homework. So, Galley, again, you killed it. And then also I wanted to mention, so some of these comments in here are pretty funny. How to be a millionaire shorting Tesla, start as a billionaire. That was just amazing. He didn't short Tesla, he shorted his career. So there are some very funny comments in here. So I invite you to go there. That was from Kaskin Academy. I think I've been watching a few of theirs lately, and they're pretty interesting. So definitely go there. Just as I mentioned with Jack, and he's just been killing it, where I think a couple of weeks ago I mentioned he talked about where I think he had something like 1,100 shares of Tesla, sold about 800, pocketed quite a bit, turned around, flipped those into some options. That also encouraged me. I used to play options years ago, so I've been killing it on these options as well. Although this week it's been a little fun, but I'm still doing great. But anyway, so as you can see, the title just says it all, so highly recommend you watch that, as well as the other two videos I mentioned about this in the past. The one where he talked about getting out of long with full stock and getting into options, and then there was another one where I talked about where he detailed exactly how he's doing it with spreadsheets and everything. So watch those three. The options you can make short investments a lot better and faster, more profitable, but of course they are far more risky. So if you can't stomach it, then definitely stay long with your stocks and just keep buying dollar cost averaging. Again, as I always say, I'm not an investment advisor, so speak with your investment advisor. Just take my information and use that as data to then make your own decisions. Again, just more great information from Jack. So a little fun here. So here's a story where CNBC interviewed Neil deGrasse as to who are the most important people alive. And I won't say who he comes up with, but it's probably pretty easy to figure out. Because it's CNBC, he talks about obviously Elon Musk just killing it with disruptive innovation, and as Kathy's always talked, where these guys have done some great things and made great things, but he's really thinking about society and how it influences society. And there was another video I watched this week where it was about one of the SpaceX engineers who came over from NASA that he was interviewed recently, And he talked about some of that, where he even joked about where he made some comment one time, wasn't kind of thinking, and somebody asked him a question early on, years ago, and it was something along the lines of where he ended up sort of, afterwards he realized that he almost maybe insulted Elon. And when they were comparing, it was against Tesla from 100 years ago. No, it wasn't Tesla, it was one of the other, the guy who, I can't think of it right now, who did the Spruce Goose. I don't know why I'm not thinking of it. But anyway, he did a quick comparison, wasn't thinking. He was trying to do it with the new, and then he later explained to Elon that he meant, as they were at their, their earlier stages, not with, I don't know why I can't think of his name. Anyway, so Musk, thought about it for a minute and then finally said, yeah, but his, Musk's inventions are all about, improving the world as opposed to, building something fantastic. Now, the Spruce Goose was supposed to be to help the war because they needed, to leverage more wood as opposed to metal and so forth. But, obviously we know where Tesla's going with this, so it's pretty amazing. And obviously I will think of that and I will put it in the comments, or I don't edit my videos, so I'll just try to put it in the comments. Okay, I don't know why I can't think of that. All right, so some more fun little stories here. So again, where I talk about disruptive tech innovation, and I keep saying how I like to follow Tesla, artificial intelligence, and blockchain, and I think that the three together, go hand in hand. Obviously, artificial intelligence has a lot more that it can do. I've talked about in the past where, it does healthcare and, all these other things, governments or whatever. But I'm focused on AI with regard to, as we just say here, learnings, improving businesses, stocks, considers how it helps and it empowers people to make decisions or to improve our lives. Again, I don't necessarily, maybe once in a while I'll talk about a healthcare piece if maybe it applies to Tesla or to blockchain or whatever, but mostly, I follow it within these three areas. But here's a great story where Musk talks about Bitcoin, and I had mentioned that recently, where I remember hearing a story that he, a few years ago, where Musk, wasn't going to be doing any blockchain or cryptocurrency, but he does a great story, very in-depth, historical in-depth discussion on where he thinks Musk is thinking with, maybe potentially whatever. Again, I don't want to, you watch his video, the whole discussion of Musk with cryptocurrency. So another great story, and very similar to that, how Musk talks a lot about artificial intelligence. Now we know with our discussions with Lex Fridman, how he's interviewed Musk many times, and Joe Rogan has as well, and they've all talked about. And of course, Rogan does a lot of AI discussions too. So obviously, we're all familiar with Elon Musk talking about artificial intelligence and his concerns, his theories, his in-depth analysis of where he thinks things are going. So this was another very quick, brief overview of that. It was a very good discussion. And here was yet another article on that, or I should say story, video, a little more in depth. And listening to some of these, it's it's amazing his knowledge, it's amazing what he thinks, and it's amazing what the potential is. So again, watch those. So we mentioned quickly about some of the short sellers, and where I thought at first it wasn't a big number because I thought they were still around 25 million shares out there. But this story did talk about a little bit about that, how the sellers have covered about 12 billion worth of stock. So a little good update information here, and this is from this week as well. As is, we talked about, here's a story here, a little bit more short seller, and at the very bottom they talk about the bottom numbers, and we know Tesla's number one shorted stock, and they summarize it here, where the short interest is down to 16 billion, or is at 16 billion, I should say. Okay, and then lastly, we mentioned this earlier, that they've been able to improve their, or have their injuries, and that's always the thing with manufacturing, of course, worker safety. So those are some great numbers. Hopefully that should also help out. Okay, so with that, I'd like to just end the summary for today on episode 5A of Disruptive Tech Innovation. As always, please like, subscribe, and share, so that way we all can be very familiar with what's happening out there, of course, with Tesla. And as always, go to all those other channels, look at those details, get a lot more information with those and some of the others I've mentioned in the past. And as always, I will put all of those links in the notes of this, in the description of this video. Okay, thanks for your time, and we will see you next week.